Originally envisioned as a second feature, but at the same time struggling with the historical truths and imposing roster of characters, this film would lead Coppola to begin work on a parallel project which in turn evolved into Lost in Translation, a film whose success would in turn revamp this project. Setting out to create not another stuffy costume drama with Marie Antoinette, Coppola here blends contemporary with traditional as lavish gowns and powdered wigs, a soundtrack to a combination of new wave and post-punk. Here, the film follows the life of Marie Antoinette from her marriage to Louis XVI through to the fall of the House of Versailles, with Coppola drawing inspiration from Evelyn and Antonia Fraser's biographies of Antoinette to craft a film which is less of a history lesson but instead more of a rich girl fantasy, as Coppola here focuses on the life of a queen and the people in Antoinette's life. I'm Owen. You're listening to Movies and Tea. Let's take it to the booth. Welcome everyone to another exciting edition of Movies and Tea. Tonight we are going to be looking at Sofia Coppola's third film, Marie Antoinette, a diversive title to say the least, and this film being released in 2006, hot on the heels of Lost in Translation, a film which not only introduced her to the world properly after the, middling success of Virgin Suicides. Here with Lost in Translation, she had truly established herself as a directorial force, and everyone was very keen to see how she would follow it up. And certainly, a lavish historical epic was certainly perhaps not the film that we were expecting, but here we are. A film which I think a lot of people either liked or they disliked. It sort of fell very much in between, and certainly for myself, a film that I've ranked very low in her filmography, but at the same time, as we've found since compiling the show, there's people such as the Vern over at Cinema Recall who've ranked this as one of Coppola's best, which of course makes it all the more interesting when we come to this re-evaluation, which obviously we're doing over the course of this season of her work. Now, Kim, was this the first time watching yourself, or?
Yeah, from now on, all the movies are first time watches. So yes, Marie Antoinette actually has been on my, movies that I should see, but I haven't gone around to.
Okay.
So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not in the party of the Vern. I don't know. I mean, it was a very, like it didn't have the depth of the first two films, and it didn't also like really dedicate itself to the historical drama. But then, there were all these little aesthetics, I would call it, I guess, soundtrack and color scheme and all that sort of stuff, which is, and, some of like just how the whole cinematography of it was done, that is really nice. But I'm just not a big fan of historical dramas, and this one was really, not even very much historical drama. It was like you said, a rich girl's fantasy, right?
Yeah, I mean, when it certainly comes to costume dramas, it's certainly not something that really holds my interest. I mean, obviously being a Brit, it's all we seem to churn out these days is just another costume drama and an excuse for people to dress in stockings and bustiers seems to be our thing at the moment, rather than producing anything really sort of with any sort of grit to it. And it's kind of interesting when it comes to Marie Antoinette. I mean, I no real historical grounding for this figure. I know that she's rather disliked, and certainly in terms of French history. And Coppola herself was exactly the same. She had no real clue about Marie Antoinette. She just had this sort of fascination with the character and what she sort of represented, that she wanted to set out and make this movie. So she entered into this film with like no idea about the history of Antoinette or anything like that at all. And somehow she's sort of like sets out to craft this film, which is not going to be a history lesson. It's going to be very much just a film shown through the eyes of Antoinette and the people around her, and just sort of create this sort of piece of time, but at the same time allowing herself like the artistic freedom to, throw in a new wave track, or if she wants to like use a song by The Cure, we'll throw that in the soundtrack. So it's got this very contemporary edge, and I think that's what makes it so Coppola. And it very much surprised me, the fact when you look at the film, that it's got this sort of grandeur and scale of the sort of epics that we more associate with her father, Francis, than we would associate with her work, which are often, as we said before, they're very intimate works. But here we've got like cast of thousands, and we've got all these. We've got a costume department which is working 24 hours a day just to keep up the demands that the production's put on. I mean, they were using like 8 costume houses just to supply the costumes for this production. And it's so lavish and grand in scale. I mean, they're shooting in the House of Versailles. So it's all been shot on location in France. And I couldn't help but wonder whether... how much of that was to do with, obviously, the success of Lost in Translation, and how much is to do with the fact that her father, Francis, is the producer here, and whether that's responsible, once again, for opening more doors than she would have had open to her just from the fact of her being an independent director. It certainly gives the film this sort of like feel of realism to it that you wouldn't get if this was all done on sets.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always, you know, something that I enjoy is, you know, when you're able to shoot on location. It's always something, you know, especially because when you think about, you know, just indies and a lot of other movies in general, they, you know, even bigger films that we have nowadays, you know, when you're shooting in New York, you're actually on like a decorated, modified Montreal street or something.
Yes.
Or like France's, you know, old Montreal. You'd be surprised how Montreal is everywhere in movies now. So when you can actually find someone who can really, you know, have, you know, the ability to go somewhere and shoot on site for, you know, a film like this, it, you know, even if it's not close to history, it still gives it a much nicer feel. It's not like, you know, you close a door and then it looks like the building's gonna fall apart or something like that. And there's still that grandeur. There's nothing that, you know, you can't replace the Versailles, right? You can't replace the castle. You can't replace all that stuff. So yeah, no, I think that's really nice. But I don't know. I mean, you were talking about, you know, the contrast of contemporary and modern, and I was like thinking about it a lot while I was watching it. How, you know, one of the best parts of the movie, if it didn't have the soundtrack, and would have really changed how the movie would have felt, because it gives it this very like more lighthearted feeling to this story of this woman who also, I guess, also defines the tone of the movie itself, because Marie Antoinette feels like she goes into France and she sees all these things that happen, and they seem to her at one point, she's like, this is ridiculous.
Yes.
You know, and yet no one seems to say that it is, right? And everything, you know, you just see from, like, I've never noticed before, because, I don't know, I've never felt like Kirsten Dunst is, like, a super great actress. At least not in the beginning of her career. I haven't seen anything more recent. But, I mean, like, I never felt like she was such a great actress. But in this one, I really appreciated her as Marie Antoinette, because she had these, like, little impressions because a lot of her character was, you know, not a lot of talking, because it's very, you know, it could be just this Coppola, because her characters don't usually talk a lot and they observe more. You know, it made Marie Antoinette into, like, the fact that she would do these little expressions that would kind of, like, make it, like, really show how she felt like this was ridiculous. You know, there were these, like, awkward smiles with her husband, and then there would be, like, this, you know, every morning she would wake up with a bunch of people opening the curtains, and she'd be like, oh God, what this is again, right? And then
Oh, definitely so. And I think when you look at the film, I mean, it can really be split into really 2 halves. We've obviously got her life prior to becoming queen, where when she's introduced, she's supposed to be 14 years old.
Yeah.
Which obviously she's not, because she's very clearly in her 20s, the same as Jason Schwartzman. And here she's married off to... She's brought across from Austria to be married across to King Louis. The King Louis's grandson. And it's really just a political move. It's to retain this bond between France and Austria. So it's not really about romance at all. It's just purely a political move. And she's, as I said, she's brought in from this life where she's very sort of privileged to begin with, but then when she's brought into Versailles, it's this whole other level entirely, and she's got to learn all these new rules, such as the scene when she first wakes up in the palace, and I just really love this sequence entirely. It's probably one of my highlights of the scene, and she's like, "Oh, you can't get yourself changed. It falls to the highest ranking person in the room to help you change," and the fact they have to constantly stop starting. She's completely naked, but they have to keep stop starting because a higher ranked person keeps entering the room, and you can see you can see in her sort of like handler this exasperation. It's sort of like, oh, can we just get on with this? Do we have to really be following these rules? And the fact that it's sort of like, it's all tradition, and everything has to be followed in rules and such. As like when she's sitting down to breakfast, it's like, when you take a drink, you don't put it on the table, you have to put it back onto this tray being held by this waiter, and you're having people constantly waiting on you hand and foot, and everything you're doing will be for an audience. There's no less than at least 30 people in the room, like, be it you waking up or having breakfast, whatever you do, there's people waiting or observing you. They just want to be surrounding you in your aura, and this is even before she becomes queen, and it's quite amusing seeing her adjusting to this life. And then obviously when we get into the second half, and she just really becomes the embodiment of Antoinette that we obviously know, in this spoilt princess who lavishes her status and position as she sort of like spends her time hanging around with her ladies in waiting, and just drinking and hanging out in the countryside and just generally having a good time, while France is falling into revolution and falling apart, while she's sort of like frivolously spending money on just a whim and gambling and things. So it's a really interesting just evolution of a character, and I think certainly when it comes to Kirsten Dunst's performance, I think she perfectly captures that. She captures the innocence of when she's introduced to the past, and at the same time is able to capture and embody what many people associate this character to be. So
yeah, I think definitely, like, when you talk about the highlight of Marie Antoinette, I think that, Kirsten Dunst is a really good, like, it's a good choice for the character, and it's also because the character is written so well, I guess, that she's, the development of her character works really well, in the sense that, you follow her, and you have, you see a real contrast as she, gets used to the, I guess, this uptight French society, and she slowly kind of finds her way around, especially, after she actually has a kid. After she's able to birth a child, because she's able to convince her husband to finally,
finally sleep with her,
be intimate with her.
Yeah.
So, that's like, I think that was one of the things that was the most questionable, because for the longest time it felt like, what is the deal with, this Louis character? Why is he not, interested? Because he knows the rules more than she does. And he also should be aware that, if they don't consummate their love, they're not like officially married according to what they were saying, and, the letters and mom and, her mom and all that stuff that was, going back and forth about, telling her that she has to lock down this, this man to make things, to secure her spot as queen.
Oh, definitely so. And I think certainly the political games are certainly what makes the first half so interesting, because she's constantly receiving these messages like, as you said, she's got to lock down her marriage, otherwise he may get bored and move on to something else. He may replace her, which in turn is going to affect this arrangement between Austria and France, which is obviously not something they want. And at the same time, she's got further pressure because her brother and sister have been married off into equal positions of power, and they're able to bear children, and she's sort of the last one who's sort of like not fulfilling her part of the arrangement, so to speak. And it's certainly, when you look at her relationship with Louis, who for the first half he's played like he may actually be gay, and he's got more interest in going hunting and, his interest in locksmithery and just hanging out with his male friends than he does in in Antoinette, who's, she's this beautiful girl, and when she's obviously been brought into the fold and she's been given all these lavishes, she's only sort of has her beauty sort of heightened, and yet he never seems to be interested. He'd always like makes excuses and seems overly awkward, which I think when you got Jason Schwartzman playing the role, Coppola's cousin, because this was a real family affair. I mean, her father's producing, her brother Roman's doing second unit directing, and obviously here we got Schwartzman here playing the lead male role. And he's also a really interesting comparison when we compare him to his grandfather, here played by Rip Torn, who is just fantastic. And he's kind of a deviant, because he's carrying on with his mistress, here played by Asia Argento, again daughter of Dario Argento. And I wish that Tasia and Coppola would just work together more, because she's so good in this film. And originally she was supposed to be played by Angelina Jolie, who dropped out to go and film The Good Shepherd. Don't know why, but still. And then they were going to bring in Catherine Zeta-Jones, but she chose not to, and in the end they brought in Asia Argento, who perfectly embodies this character of King Louis' mistress. And as a mistress, she's supposed to be, they're accepting the fact that the king is allowed a mistress to fulfill certain desires that his queen perhaps may not, but at the same time they're being forced to accept her at royal gatherings, and as that he's quite happy to carry on with her in public. It's before it was expected that if you have a mistress, you keep her away in the countryside somewhere. You don't have her on full display in public, and yet she's here as is very clearly his favorite. And what surprised me more is the fact that you have this weird sex scene where they're pretending to be cats, which doesn't at all seem creepy. It seems vaguely erotic, and it's sort of like, how the hell did you manage to make this scene? Because he's very clearly older and she's this this enchanting young thing, and yet this doesn't seem creepy like in when we look at Alexander, where we have pretty much the same sort of scene. It seems like perfectly acceptable, and that they vibe really well off each other, which never seems to happen when we have like the older actor conversing with the young actress.
Yeah, and on a deeper level, actually, that scene comes right after this awkward moment of where Marie Antoinette is trying to get things going, and nothing happens. They just kind of smile at each other, right? And then you turn over and you go over to this scene, and you're just kind of like, wow, the older folks are having a wilder time than these two people here.
Well, even at the dinner parties, they're like, he's making out and she's there. Oh, she's completely offending everyone at the table because of the fact she just belches, and she's got no class compared to these other sort of members of aristocracy. And they're openly gossiping about her, which I absolutely love. And she does not care in the slightest. Yet her mother encourages Antoinette to form this relationship with the mistress, because she knows that, if she seems being friends with her, then it's going to give her this inroad, because, the king will further approve of her. And I mean, the king from the start, I think, I just love how dissimilar to a deviant is, the fact he openly talks about looking at women's bosoms before their faces, and it's sort of like, well, good for you. And I think only Rip Torn could get away with that sort of character. It's a very specific sort of actor, and to see Rip Torn doing a classical role is just even more genius casting here, because normally he's just these blustering types, and I think there's very few actors, especially of the older generation, that you can get away with just being such an open pervert like that. So, but yeah, I love how the film also opens. The fact we get this shot of what many people associate as Antoinette. She's lounging, surrounded by cakes, and she's this, she's surrounded in this vibrant sort of gown, and then we cut to her as an inside. And I did, obviously, when I saw that opening shot, I was like, oh, that's how Kim tends to podcast. So
what?
I was going to post that screenshot, and it's like, just say this is how you normally podcast. So good to see that being represented. Wafting around the place. And it makes, as I said, it makes an interesting contrast when we obviously go from that scene of what you associate with the character to her then being this form of innocence. But just that opening shot, it's not her as the spoilt role that we come to see her as in the second half of the film. Here it's this sense of like attraction and allure to her character. We've yet to have all the sort of background that goes with it. We're just sort of seeing here, and it's like this glimpse of what we can expect once we enter the House of Versailles, that it's going to be, lavish cakes and equally more lavish gowns. And I have to say that the film, just in terms of eye candy, does an astonishing job, and Lance Accord's cinematography again just really coming into effect here. And I mean, going into this film, I have to obviously ask, what did you think of just like the cinematic eye candy we have here, and just the sheer amount of food porn, especially?
Well, I'm a big fan of, all this stuff that revolves around food and filming food and all that sort of glamorous stuff. So while I think that the second half of the film didn't, when we were really into that whole lavish lifestyle was a bit, it was a bit overboard, I guess, and it felt a bit more empty than I guess the first part. It was really cool how it was shot. Like, it was really, really fun to watch all this stuff, and then you have all these macarons and all that stuff that's just around, and you just, you see cakes, and even from before, in the beginning, you still have food, and there's always some kind of cake around her and that sort of stuff. So it's really nice, when you start cycling through all these things, and then it's just the cinematic work here is done where you're not just looking at her consuming everything, but you're looking at kind of the whole shopping element where you just watching them go through the place from a low angle at the shoes and the feet and stuff like that, walking around, and you have the whole food is shot from up above going downwards and then just cycles through, and then you have a lot of really effective ways of jumping through food and shopping and gambling and that sort of thing. And those sequences were really nice because it was a really, I think, a quick change in gear, but it also showed that it was also a quick way to show that Marie Antoinette, as she was going into this discovering the side of her where she's being comfortable in this queen position, and she has no more worries anymore because they wanted her to have a child, and she had children, she had a son, and then now there's nothing. She just needs to be a mother, and kind of, because she doesn't need to do anything anyways. It's not her taking care of her kid anyways. And then, she can just relax, and she can be in her world. And that's why she's, she moves out of the, the Versailles palace, right?
Yes, I mean, she's... But now, I mean, obviously, in the second half, I mean, it spends a lot of time with her at Petit Trianon, which is a small chateau in the Park of Versailles. And I mean, here she's so wrapped up in the grandeur of everything. I mean, she's completely oblivious to what's happening meanwhile in France. I mean, there's food shortages and there's financial crisis. I mean, you get hints of this as the fact that she's unable to fill her charitable donations, and none of it really matters to her. I mean, she's more interested in as I said, just wandering around the grounds, and she seems to be drunk half the time, but she's probably just more drunk on just the lifestyle, and just how she has so little care in the world that she can spend her days just hanging out with her friends, having tea and harassing the garden,
finding herself a little boy toy.
I know, in Axel Pheasant. And I mean, the actual the in terms of this affair, I mean, it's unknown whether it was actually consummated as we see in the film, but it's also said that King Louis was obviously aware of it, but he was actually quite fond of Fersen, and was happy for him and Antoinette to carry on their fling. He apparently had no qualms about this, which I no idea why not, but apparently it was not a big deal to him. So
I think that what Louis had for Marie Antoinette was more he was fascinated by her because she didn't, like, especially, I guess, based on this film, okay? I know nothing about history of it. But based on this film, I feel like Louis became interested in her first and gave her a second glance when they were at that theater. And she got up when nobody did to clap. And then everybody followed her to clap. And I think that impressed him. That impressed him a lot because she was kind of like this symbol of freedom that he didn't have. You know, he always grew up with this, you know, lockdown and this kind of tradition, which was so, you know, normal every day. Someone would come in and change you, and then someone would bring you breakfast at this time, and you'd be just doing all these things under everybody's supervision. Whereas she's not afraid to, you know, break out of this pattern a little and be herself.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's what was attracting him to, you know, be able to have these, you know, be able to, you know, have relationships with her. And be more intimate with her. But if you were to say whether he was really in love with her, I think at a certain point it was only a sense of responsibility and that she was his queen. And I think he knows that, you know, his happiness might not be with her, and, you know, her happiness might not be with him. And I feel that that's what it is, you know, like, she's away, she's doing her stuff, she's not bothering him about things. You know, everything that needs to be done between them is done already.
Oh, definitely so. And you get the sense that obviously when she's out in the countryside and he's carrying on doing whatever, which assumed, I guess, hunting and having a good time doing whatever he's doing. And the fact that they, you know, that he can, when he needs her to be by his side, all he needs to do is ride out in the country and, you know, request her that she accompany him. And you can see that they have this bond, even though how romantic it is, it's hard to say. I mean, certainly she welcomes his advances when he has the birds and bees explained to him through the terminology of lockmaking. Mm-hmm. Which it's, you know, there's some dispute over whether that did or didn't happen, although it is obviously mentioned. The Duke obviously did brag about it in letters to Antoinette's mother, as we see in the film. So I would not take this film as a history lesson. If you're asked to write a paper on Antoinette, don't use this as a history lesson. This is, as I said, this is a fantasy that we're watching here, and as I said, feels like a very much rich girl fantasy. I mean, we've constantly seen rich girls throughout the past in other productions, such as like Blair in Gossip Girl, who have this fascination with Antoinette and what she represents, and this is very much the same case here. But for myself, I mean, it sort of loses its momentum in the second half. In the first half, there's great momentum. As I said, we get plenty of like grandeur. As I said, we get copious amounts of food porn, so people like myself who are just enjoy seeing large amounts of cake on the screen are very well serviced as well. People want to see, you know, this fantasy of like Versailles. You can understand with the spiritness of Antoinette, the fact because when she's first introduced, she's very sort of meek, and it was very surprising how she quickly takes to it. I mean, mm-hmm. She is transferred over to France with nothing. I mean, she even has a pug taken away because she has to enter France with nothing. Like her friends. And
and have a French dog. She can have all kinds of French dogs that she
Poodle.
wants. And I was like, what's a French dog?
That's the only French dog I know.
They didn't have poodles.
Yeah,
Those ladies with dogs
her pug
didn't have
Mops, which was taken away from her. Count Mercer did actually arrange to have it sent to her after her marriage. So while we see the pug taken away from her in the film, in real life she did get reunited with her beloved pug. So, but I think it serves its purpose in the film as the fact that, you know, you enter with nothing. You're basically stripped down and you're rebuilt into this image of what France needs. And just that political thing, but when she gets settled into, once she gets the rules of this world, she has this real sort of spirit, which you said already, when she sort of stands up at the theatre and starts clapping, and you can understand why his grandfather, likes her so much, because she embodies so much of what he is. She's this spirited, entity in this very uptight society where everyone's sort of like playing by these sort of rules and traditions, and they're the ones breaking the rules and traditions because, as I said, they're royals. They can do what they want. And it's almost like she knows that, even though no one ever bothers to like question her, that, you know, once she becomes royal, she can just do what she wants. There's never a question of, what should I be doing this? Is this going to affect anything? It's like once she's got her feet under the table and she's crowned queen, it's sort of like all bets off of what she's going to do. And as I said, she embarks on an affair and quite happy to gamble away the royal finances and hold lavish parties. And while everyone's suffering food shortage, she's gorging herself on cake. So, to much of the strains of I Want Candy, which I thought was just perfect pairing. That was like the real turning point. It's like, okay, now she's Antoinette. She's the Antoinette we think, no, when you hear I Want Candy, it's sort of like, no, now she's not this meek girl from Austria anymore. She's this fantasy queen here who's, as I said, she's just living this lavish lifestyle, this rich girl fantasy. And yeah, it's just a shame that.
But I think that's the charm of the second part. While I don't really like the second part too much, I think that, you know, the fact of the second part was really her. Not only was it that she moved away to somewhere else most of the time in like a countryside area, but it was more like she was free from all those rules at the palace, and she could still enjoy the lavish lifestyle of being a royal, but be herself a little bit more, you know, not have to worry about all these eyes looking at her. And she had like the people that she wanted with her, like, you know, the Duchess, which is played really well by Rose Byrne. So, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, there is a lot. If you think if you know, I took a little bit more time as we're discussing now, and I'm starting to see like little things that I feel that really makes this, you know, a Coppola film, and those little touches she did and those little transitions in character. And I find, you know, like Coppola is really great at making and building these kind of like character studies sort of thing, and really like focusing on just these character developments. You know, whether the execution is great or not, that really, you know, depends on the person.
It's funny how she's still able to work in these trademarks, such as like a female character looking out of the window and doing looking at this sort of crossroads of their life. And as we obviously have with Antoinette, she's looking out the carriage window, and we have like the light coming through for the trees when we have like the scenes of the hunting, and when she's obviously in the countryside. So I love the fact that she's still able to work in her trademarks as a director, even though the period you wouldn't think would allow for such shots to exist, but she still manages to work it in. And I think the fact that she so frequently breaks the rules here, much like Antoinette, with, you know, what she's going to do with this costume drama. It's sort of like she, as I said, I think she makes the right move by not making it another stuffy costume drama. You know, saying, you know, if I want to put a Sushi and the Banshees track in here, I'm gonna put Sushi and the Banshees track. It's gonna create a fragile, dreamlike world, and everything's gonna hinge on a sort of knife edge of whether this is gonna work or not. But just damn her for trying it, and I love the fact that.
You know, I think that is the charm of this movie, because while it's kind of like, you know, it is a costume drama, but it defines itself because, you know, costume dramas are most popular done in the UK. And in the UK, It's very uptight. It's very, you know, to the, you know, everything is done very royal, very beautiful. You use beautiful classical music, orchestra music, and that sort of thing. And what defines hers, and I feel that, you know, really gives her a change, is that not only is it done by, you know, like an American, but it's also the fact that, you know, she's doing some kind of Europe history, but it's more of a biography of a person loosely based on this historical character. And she decides to, you know, clash, you know, add in, you know, she's like, what are rules, you know? Doesn't matter. Doesn't mean when I do history, I have to do some orchestra music. I can go and do contemporary music, do some modern stuff, you know, punk music or whatever, you know, and give it its own style. And I think that, you know, that really gives it its uniqueness, and, you know, something that like I said before, the things I like the most about this is not really the execution of the movie or the story itself, but more, like individually the character, or, like the soundtrack, and even like the choice of colors for the costume and that sort of stuff. Like you have all these pastel colors, and you have these odd color choices, and it's a very colorful movie, which is, very different compared to, obviously it's, fairly, I guess it's like, they got to run for their lives at the end, so it's not a great ending for Marie Antoinette, but, overall, it's a lot more lighthearted experience than, say, Virgin Suicides or Lost in Translation even, who, tackles both, one tackles loneliness and one tackles, coming of age.
Oh, definitely. Way. I think she cuts it off at the right point historically in the fleeing of Versailles. Obviously, Antoinette is obviously headed into the guillotine, so it's not a good time for her. But I think rather than end on such a dour note, it sort of ends when the fantasy ends. So at the end, we see from the start of the dream through to the end of the dream, just that key period here. And I think that's why that certainly is a smart move on her part, rather than doing a full history of this character, just to keep it in the sort of key part which we want to see, rather than just like the downfall and just end it on this bleak note. And I think, as I said, it pushes it at 2 hours, so I really don't want to go into a third hour of this. Yeah, it's certainly still not my favourite of her film, but there's certainly elements that I do enjoy throughout, and I certainly love the risk taking that she obviously takes with this film, and to create a unique view that she does. So, it should be noted that all the cakes were remade daily, and when you obviously consider just the amount of cakes in the show, that's a hell of a production. It's made by Lauderie.
Oh, no way.
So yeah, I mean, if you're a fan of, as I say, if you're a fan of food on film, this film certainly delivers on that prospect, and I think it's going to affect when we get into further watching a couple of the picks I have for this and what you compare it with. So, well, Alain Delon was originally going to be cast in the film, and he met Sofia Coppola for dinner, and he actually brought the director a huge bouquet of flowers and explained that he did not think this was the type of role that his fans would appreciate him in, but privately at the same time speculated that the French icon did not have confidence in a young American director to do justice to a film in this period of French history. The film critically was received very warmly by critics. There was a couple of boos when it premiered at Cannes, which did lead to a lot of people saying that, it was a very diverse audience, but so Roger Ebert said that, there was only a couple of boos from the foreign press, and the whole thing had sort of been blown out of proportion. So, but I mean, generally the film isn't her most successful. I mean, it was budgeted at 40 million, made 60.9 million on its return, which isn't particularly great, but it still managed to gain a lot of sort of like awards, certainly in terms of the Academy Awards, where it won Best Costume Design, and it also won the Cinema Prize of French National Education System at the 2006 Cannes Films Awards. So critically it was very, very praised, and certainly the award show, but this isn't certainly her most successful film to date. Did you notice a young Tom Hardy amongst the American soldiers?
No.
Yes, he's after the scene where she's so greeting the returning American generals, they have the dinner party where they're playing the name game outside and smoking opium, and it's a very youthful looking Tom Hardy that's amongst them.
I might have made the point of like, oh, hey, that person looks familiar, but who is it?
I know, I had to do a bit of a double take and like then go onto IMDb. It's like, is that the same person I think? Matthew Ulmerich also shows up as a man at the masked ball, who I just love Matthew Ulmerich. So anytime he shows up, even if it's just a little cameo, I'm just really happy he was in there. So, something we didn't touch on as well, especially with the fact that everything she does is have an audience. How did you find the birthing sequence of her first child, where it's like 40 people in the room watching her give birth?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not that surprising after the fact, that she has to stand naked while she's waiting for people to dress her in the beginning, right? So it felt like it was normal that people were watching her give birth, because people just like to watch everything that she's doing.
True, and I mean, back in this sort of days, people would like turn up to public executions and autopsies and all sorts of
I feel like
grotesque
I feel like
things.
it's just the rules in the palace that the people are there to watch the queen give birth, and that's a big deal. You wanna welcome this this future prince that's coming to the world, and it's not too weird.
I think this is something, again, I appreciate about the film, is like when we compare it to its British counterparts, and everyone's very prim and proper, and people in the 17th century weren't exactly prim and proper. They were off doing things in the woods and thinking they were getting closer to God by engaging in various acts and stuff, and there was a lot of kinky business going on, and I think the fact the film touches upon it, I mean, as I said, we have scenes of people smoking opium, we have this grandeur and people turning up to watch Marie Antoinette give birth and stuff. I mean, I love the realism of that. It's the sort of thing that you want to see from this sort of period. You don't want to see people just acting prim and proper and speaking all polite and being nice to each other while attending dances and being married off at a whim. So in terms of costume drama, I like this one. So
the one that's the least the normal costume drama.
The one that distanced itself as far away from the British film productions as possible, I like. So this one, because it all feels too close to home whenever I watch like costume dramas, because that's all we tend to produce. And seeing as we're just surrounded by history around here, we're just constantly tripping over the things. So it doesn't hold the same sort of appeal to American audiences who are obsessed with London and cobbled streets and all that sort of that Dickensian vision. It's all like that does nothing for me. I'd rather where compared to if I see these visions like the American indie sort of landscape, and just sort of any sort of visions of America always hold more of appeal. And I guess this is the trade-off. Americans and people outside of Britain are just interested in this historical vision of what Britain is, and what I think a lot of people assume we are, since every time you hear someone talk about Britain, we're either Cockney or we're super posh. Those are the two accents everyone goes to. We apparently all sound like a Dick Van Dyke chimney sweep. So.
Well, I mean, I get where you're coming from, because when we talk about Asian cinema, I'm a lot more of the type which is things that got to America when I've seen it for 20 years of my life already. It doesn't appeal to me as much as when it first got here. It's a big deal that people find that because I'm not a big fan of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and everybody else is.
No.
And I'm just but the thing is, I've watched this stuff forever.
It's not got anything new. Was obviously to Western audiences, it's all new concept. It's the idea of where it's, as I said, with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, we've essentially got Sense and Sensibility with swords, and that holds a great appeal to the West because we don't come up with this sort of thing, and we don't have people flying through the airs and fighting in bamboo trees and all these sort of elements that a film like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon provides. So this is all very unique and interesting to ourselves.
Yeah, because at that moment, the closest thing we had to, Chinese cinema was, Bruce Lee. And he wasn't, the flying in the air type. So, it's a change, right? And I think that's the same thing for, period dramas. Because, obviously, me and you were different on that level because, being from Canada, I also have that, love for period drama, but mine stems a lot from the fact that I love watching, I love reading Austen books and stuff like that. So I have a different sort of I appreciate a lot of the classic stuff that isn't made anywhere else in the world but in the UK. So I don't really have a choice but to go there.
That's I mean that in respect was also what made me really so interested to see what you made of this film, because I know obviously you've been a fan of Austen, and the world of Austen doesn't fall too very far from the world of Antoinette. So I was very curious to see, obviously, what you would have made of it, and I knew at the same time this was going to be the tricky film with this filmography, because the other films I've got, apart from The Beguiled, which is going to be a first time watch myself, so I had sort of like opinions and ideas of what it was, and Marie Antoinette never resonated with me the two times I'd seen it prior to this. So I think watching it this time, I appreciate a little more. There's certain elements I appreciated more than I did previously, perhaps coming to it as an older viewer, but certainly it's still not. I don't hold it in the same regard that our friend the Vern does, which I'm very curious to know why. So maybe we can get a voicemail, or we'll get some word from him, and he can explain himself. What is it you like about this movie, Vern? Is it cake or powdered bosoms? Where's the allure lie for you, my friend?
And we're waiting for an answer. We're waiting for it.
We have. We sent him over a very nice message, and hopefully we'll have some sort of return on that. But who knows?
So are we going into further viewing?
Yes. So further viewing, if you like Marie Antoinette or you're looking for something similar, I mean, where do you sort of go next?
Oh boy, the world is the limit, right? There are so many historical dramas that you can pair with this one, and it's ridiculous because the first two films of Coppola is almost like you had to really dig deep to find things that worked with it. At least for me.
Yeah.
For this one, I mean, right off, I already was watching this, and I already was like, oh, the other Boleyn girl. I hated the movie, but it pairs well with this one. That
was on my list as well. That was one of my films that my wife had picked randomly back when we first started coursing. I said, just pick anything when we were at the store, and she picked that. And I was surprised I actually enjoyed the other Boleyn girl. And this seems to always happen. She always picks these movies I think I'm never going to enjoy, but I always end up really loving, so... Damn her and her good film choices.
Well, I don't share the same love for it, so I'm gonna not talk about that so much. But the other one obviously was Anna Karenina, with the lovely Keira Knightley. So yeah, I mean, Anna Karenina plays a lot similar to Marie Antoinette, but a lot more dramatic, less colorful, that sort of deal.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll start with those two. There's probably a ton more, but these two were the first two that really came to my mind that had a lot of the royal lifestyle, people getting married into a family, into a new world in that sense, and embracing the royal life in that way as well.
Very nice. For myself, first off, I would have to highlight Plunkett McLean, which is another contemporary history lesson. And this one features Robert Carlyle and Johnny Lee Miller playing highwaymen. Again, this was released in 1999, the greatest movie year ever. And it's a film that sort of like disappeared. As I say, it came out and disappeared. It had a lot of buzz when it came out, and it's had something of a little bit of a cult following over here in the UK, but it's, as I said, another 17th century drama, and as I said, it's got that contemporary edge to it, which certainly when I look at when you had those moments of like new wave appearing on the soundtrack here, they just instantly made my mind instantly go back to that film. And you mentioned already The Other Boleyn Girl, which was going to be my other pick. So now obviously turning our focus onto the other important aspect of the film, and that would be food porn. So if you want more food porn, definitely check out Ang Lee's Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which features an opening scene of a chef preparing this elaborate banquet, but it looks absolutely exquisite. The film itself stars middle-aged chef who's losing his ability to taste, and is struggling to deal with this change from which is essentially stopping him from doing what he loves, which is obviously to cook. The other one I would also go with is Jon Favreau's Chef. Again, this isn't on the same sort of grandeur as its food trucks, but it does feature a very sexy grilled cheese, which if you watch his cooking show on Netflix, I think it's the Chef Show, they actually show you how to make that very sandwich. So you can watch the film and then get inspired and go and find out how to make your very own. So yeah, those are my slightly random picks, but that's what I would pay if you like Marie Antoinette, and certainly if you want more food porn. I think that's something that's missing from cinema. We need more films with elaborate cakes and just exquisitely shot food, do you think?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, when you were talking about food porn, I was like, oh, this is not what I expected or something. Is really good too. It's like a Chinese film. Yeah. It's on Netflix right now. Yeah, with Takeshi Kaneshiro. It's fantastic. I think I did it on one of the Friday film clubs.
I believe you did. Yes, you did.
Yeah. Yeah. It was I really, really loved it. It's like a romantic comedy. It doesn't have any history to it, but the food in it is very, very beautiful.
Come up on next. Where are we going to next, Kim?
We are going to 2010 somewhere.
Somewhere, probably the hidden gem of the Coppola filmography, as I say, it was released in 2010, very similar in many ways to Lost in Translation, as it features this actor Johnny Marco, played by Stephen Dorff, who receives a visit from his young daughter Cleo, played by Ellie Fanning, and it's basically about the two reconnecting and forming this bond, as I said, between wayward father and delightful daughter. And as I say, it's very similar in many ways to Lost in Translation, so it's going to be interesting to compare the two, to obviously see what you make of it, and certainly see if we can find out why it's been so forgotten. So that's coming up on our next episode. But in the meantime, if you haven't done already, please do like and subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to us. You can also catch us on all the social media platforms, be it Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You can check that out, where we post our interesting bits and pieces, as well as updates for the show. We post interesting behind the scenes shots and just fun perfect shots from the films that we cover on the show. You can also check out our full archive at moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com. As well as on there you can check out our Friday Film Club, where every Friday myself and Kim pick a movie each to form a weird and wonderful double feature. Sometimes there's a theme, sometimes there's not. It's just our chance to highlight the films that we love, and we also include on there the roundup of any sort of podcasts and articles that our friends and fellow members of the Lamb are posting out there that we feel that you should definitely be checking out. So until next time, well, thank you as always to my co-host Kim, and thank you everyone for listening, and we will be back next time looking at 2010s somewhere. So good night.